Negative effects of resilience in a prison environment. So, prison life has become a humane problem, specifically in the United States. Over 600,000 people are imprisoned in the U.S. Every year. This prison environment has become abusive and left people with future trauma after their life in prison. So the effects of resilience on the people who are able to survive and adapt in the prison environment shows how prison can become a negative attribute of people suffering through the prison life. Harsh conditions and forced adaptation. One man who describes his experience in prison is Nelson Mandela, a former South African president who describes his experience in this quote. To that end, one must know the enemy's purpose before adopting a strategy to undermine it. Prison is designed to break one's spirit and destroy one's resolve. To do this, the authorities attempt to exploit every weakness, demolish every initiative, negate all signs of individuality, all with the idea of stamping out that spark that makes each of us human and each of us who we are. Through this quote, we can see how Mandela was forced to adapt and develop a negative sort of resilience to the prison's way of torturing someone into a system. One of the main conditions that forces many people in the prison environment to adapt is solitary confinement. One quote from the academic journal of Public Health helps describe the mental effects solitary confinement has on people in one of their studies. Because 95% or more of all incarcerated people, including those who experience solitary confinement, are eventually released. Understanding disproportionate psychopathology matters for developing prevention policies and addressing the unique needs of people who have experienced solitary confinement, an extreme element of mass incarceration. We can see in this quote that solitary confinement is used in most prisons and is a way to break someone's soul by putting them in a room without letting them out and forcing them into an environment where they are unable to have any human contact. So some of the mental and physical effects of this resilience in prison include disorders like post-traumatic disorder and further substance dependence and suicide attempts on people who are forced into the prison life. One article from Paul Bevington describes some of these mental effects. Ex-prisoners suffered in excess of current psychiatric problems, including common mental disorders, psychosis, post-traumatic disorder, substance dependencies, and suicide attempts. They were most likely to screen positive for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autistic traits, to have low verbal IQ, and to lack qualifications. They disclosed high rates of childhood adversity, including physical and sexual abuse and local authority care. In this quote, we can see how even the people who make it out of the prison system are stuck with lifelong problems in their mind due to the abuse they suffered in prison. Another thing that can take effect on you is the physical effects in prison. Due to the abuse of things like solitary confinement and ways that prison forces people to get in line, inmates can become hostile, and violence in prison environments can become high. And also, many prisons are funded by corrupt environments and may not get the correct nutrients and foods for their prisoners. So in this graph, we can see that over half the people in prison environments have at least suffered some kind of mental disorder in their past or mental health problem, but only 1/4 of them have actually received any medical help from their prison, showing that prison environment does not care for their inmates and leaves the mass mental problems that are developed in their prisons without any care. So through prison we can see how negative resilience can be developed, but what are other examples of how resilience can be negative? Well, one quote from The Dark Side of Resilience says, in a recent study, Adrian Fernand and colleagues showed that there are dramatic differences in people's ability to adapt to stressful jobs and workplace environments. In the face of seemingly hopeless circumstances, some people resemble a superhero cartoon character that runs through a brick wall, unemotional, fearless, and hyper-phlegmatic. To protect against psychological harm, they develop quite aggressive coping mechanisms that artificially inflate their egos. In this quote, we can see how even in much less abusive environments like a workplace, people still suffer from negative resilience and start to develop an attitude that they can do anything. We can see this will be much inflated on a prison scale where people are forced to live in cages and and have to adapt to survive in their environment. Another example of how people can develop negative resilience is through veterans. One data derived from the 2002 survey of inmates in local jails and the 2000 National Survey of Veterans showed that having mental health problems, in addition to such socio-demographic characteristics, as being a member of a minority group, not being married, having less education, and being younger are risk factors for incarceration among veterans, as they are the general population. As in previous studies, veterans who served during the Vietnam era, and to even greater extent those who served in the early years of the all-volunteer forces, were at greater risk of incarceration than veterans from the most recent period of AVF after controlling for age and other factors. We can see that these veterans who suffered through brutal wars like Vietnam have developed a negative resilience where when they come back to normal life, they fall into the prison cycle and are forced into prison due to a lack